Well, good evening, and thank you so much for being a part of Side Notes. Whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, we're so glad that you clicked. You might be asking, what is Side Notes? Well, Pastor Mark is going to share about that in just a moment. Full disclosure, his part of our live event tonight is pre-recorded, and sometimes it's just the way things work. It's a little bit easier that way sometimes. So he is pre-recorded, but I promise you, you're going to be blessed by it. I'm able to be with you here tonight, and I'm so glad I could do that. I did want to take just a moment to remind you of two really important things before we pass it over to him. First is this. Go to keystone.online for anything that you need to know about Keystone, how to connect, how to listen to our most recent sermon, whatever events are coming up in any of the various ministries in our church. Also, if you would like to give and support our church financially, we have a secure giving link right there on our website, and we would love to have you be a part of that. It's so humbling that so many people support our church on a regular basis. Hey, I'm excited that we get to do this tonight, and I know that you're going to be blessed by it. So let's pass it over to Pastor Mark.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Side Notes. I know you're probably wondering, what's Side Notes? Hey, me too. I'm new here myself. But here's what it is. Sometimes I write a sermon, especially in a sermon series like Hebrews, and I have some extra things. I have some extra things I want to talk about, or maybe even verses we didn't get to. It doesn't mean we can't get to them on Sunday morning sometime. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means, I need like a full-fledged time to really dig into some other verses that we didn't cover on Sunday morning. So some people have told me over the years, sometimes you say side note, and so we're like, hey, maybe that'd be a good thing to call it. We'll call it Side Notes. Who knows how many of these we'll do? Maybe this will be the only one. It'll just be called Side Note. We'll go back and X out the S. But either way, here we are. We're in this series called By Faith, and we're in the book of Hebrews, which hopefully by now you're very familiar with it. If it's the first time you've ever heard me or been to Keystone, just grab a Bible and turn to Hebrews. If you don't have a Bible, I think the verses will be on the screen, so you can look at those too. We're in a series called By Faith, and basically that is what it's about. It's about faith and how we are to have faith and what it means to have faith and what that really means in your life as a believer, as a Jesus follower. What does it mean to have faith? And so if you look with me in Hebrews 11, verse 5, we're going to talk about two people today, and the first one is Enoch. Enoch is a fascinating character in the Bible. He's not just a character, he's a real person, really existed, but it says, by faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death. And you know what that means. Enoch didn't die. That's incredible. And he was not found because God had taken him, like up, right? Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. So if we think about that, first we gotta kind of wonder, like, who's this Enoch character, right? Why was he commended? What did he do that other people didn't do? Well, it says he was commended because he pleased God. Now, Enoch is in a very small group of people in all of history. Like, you don't get more like small than this club right here. Maybe if it's a single person, but there's only two people that we know of. God can do whatever he wants. Maybe this didn't write it down, but there's only two people that we know of that have never died. They just went straight to be with the Lord. I don't know what that looked like for Enoch, but it's Enoch and then Elijah. We do know what it looked like with Elijah. Elijah was taken up with a chariot of fire. No, not the incredible movie about runners, but like a literal chariot of fire. You may say, well, Jesus didn't die. Well, Jesus did die, but then he conquered death. So I don't think that counts. And there are some people that Jesus, performed miracles on, and they rose from the dead. But by all accounts, those people died again. Like, I don't know about you, Lazarus was not at our service last weekend, though some of you, I question maybe if you have been around that long. But anyway, so those guys they're right out. But not Enoch. Enoch entered into heaven without experiencing a physical death. So now you might be interested. What do we know about this Enoch character? Like a lot of people in the Bible, we don't know much about him. In fact, there's a summary of his life in Genesis. It says Enoch was we know, you have to kind of count this one up to figure it out. He was the seventh patriarch in the line of Adam. So small population at this point. Seventh in after Adam. That's pretty cool. At 65 years old, he fathered Methuselah. We know that about him. What do you know about Methuselah? You remember Methuselah? Methuselah lived to be, I had to write it down, lived to be 969 years old. I mean, that is a lot of Smucker's strawberry jam on today's show. Like, once again, here we go. Maybe you get a bigger jar if you hit 1,000. Oh, it's so close to 1,000. And then we know that at 365 years old, God took him. That's it. That's really all we know. We know that it says he walked with God. We know that. We know that apparently there were a ton of people around. There weren't a ton of people around at the time. So I don't know. We don't know how this played out. Honestly, it just says he went up. He went with God. So I don't know about you. I sometimes think very simply and practically, like, was he just there one minute and not the next minute? How many people are on earth at this time? I think they would have noticed Enoch's not here anymore. We don't know. What we do know is he did not see death. It says he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. That's what they get in Hebrews. So literally, the man Enoch disappeared from the earth, and thousands of years later, they write the letter to the Hebrews, and it says, oh, God took him. That's where he went. Now, I got to think if I was in the crowd, I'd be like, oh, that's what happened to Enoch. But the question isn't really to dig down and figure out, historically, who was Enoch? Who was he really? I don't think that's why we're given that little line in the Bible. I don't think that's why we're given verse 5. I think we're given it because of the application of it, because of that phrase, he pleased God. Or in Genesis, it says he walked with God, though that is sometimes translated, he pleased God. And that's super interesting to me because verse 6, right after 5, verse 6 of Hebrews 11 begins to show us like why that's important. Because it says, and without faith, it is impossible to please him. We're referencing God here. It is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So Enoch was commended because he had faith. So the goal isn't to have God just take us up without death. Like, that's not why it's in there. It's saying, and without faith, if you don't have faith, it is impossible to please God. I want you to think about that. Like, really think about it. Don't just let me think about it for you. Really think about that. It is impossible to do what? Please God without faith. So here's what that means. Here's what that means. Here's the way I wrote it out, right? I cannot walk with God, which is how they described Enoch in Genesis. I cannot do it. I cannot do it if I don't have faith. I cannot please God, which is how it's described in Hebrews. I cannot please God if I do not have faith. This is like not just a saying, right? Like, you got to please him. No, he's not you got to be a God pleaser. That's not what it means. It's not what it means. It means it is not possible. It is impossible to walk with God if you don't have faith. It isn't suggesting, though I think sometimes we hear it like this, but you got to really go one layer. Like, it isn't saying that God is mean, that God's impossible to please, that God's that person at the restaurant that you can't get his potato right. It's not what it means. It doesn't mean that at all. It means literally you cannot follow God if you do not have faith. You won't be able to do it. As in, it's just, I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over. I need to have a side note of a side note. Like, you literally, because you got to think, the book of Hebrews is a letter. Letters are written to people, and they read it, and the context of what he's saying really matters. Because at the time they were reading this letter, the Hebrews, right, here's what was going on. They were being admonished because they were beginning to lose their faith. Maybe some of you right now, you're beginning to lose your faith a little bit. Maybe you're asking questions the way the readers were that got the letter. Maybe you're saying things like, why is God doing this? Or you're saying, where is God when this happens? Or why did God let that happen? And what the writer is saying is, in order to walk with God, you got to have faith. You got to have faith. In fact, he says it, right? He levels with them. There is no way you're going to be able to follow God unless, honestly, truly, you believe that God exists. That seems pretty simple. Well, look at it. Look at it with me again. He says that. You will not draw near to God. You must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. You don't get more simple than that. How do I have faith? Believe that God exists, and you'll be able to walk with him. You will not be able to be successful without it. You may do a lot of things in your life, but you won't be able to walk with God without faith in God. And then he gives this immediate, like he says Enoch, then he says it's impossible to please him without faith, or without faith it is impossible to please him. And then he immediately puts this into application. Like whoever wrote Hebrews was a great preacher, right? I'm going to give you this thesis, and then I'm going to give you reasons. I'm going to show you how it plays out. You're going to see those over the next few weeks. You're going to see Abraham and Joseph and Moses and Rahab and Joshua and all these people that without faith, they would not have been able to walk with God. Without faith in God, they couldn't have done the things that they did. But the first one is a guy you may all know. By faith, Noah. You remember Noah? Some of you have kids. You put Noah scenes on your kids' room. Stop doing that. It's the greatest calamity that ever happened on earth. And we're like, let's make the preschool room. Let's like, what a silly thing. That's a personal thing. All right. Being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen. Do you remember the event? It's a flood, right? In reverent fear, constructed an ark, big boat, for the saving of his household. By this, he condemned the world, and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So who's this Noah fella, right? I think a lot of us are familiar with the story of Noah. Noah was a little bit after Enoch, was a lot after Adam and Eve, but at this point, population was beginning to grow, and people were not getting closer to God. They weren't improving their relationship with God. In fact, it was getting much, much worse. I mean, you saw this week, you had Cain and Abel. There was a murder. And you would think, oh, well, maybe they'll learn their lesson. They didn't. They didn't learn their lesson. By 2 flips over of the page, you have a boy stepping on someone's foot and him killing him for it. Like, it is out of control bad, the world. And so God looks upon this, and he's heartbroken with the rebellion. Because from God's perspective, which it's hard for us to see, but from God's perspective, he's given us this incredible opportunity to love him, and he's building a family, and yet over and over and over, we choose rebellion and lying and sin, and we just keep going our own way. Again, it's impossible to follow God without faith. You got to believe he exists, and hear, believe, obey, right? So God decided to start over. It's like, we're going to reboot this thing? Some people call it a failed reboot, because I don't know about you, sin is still in the world. But we get a promise with this, right? He said, basically, I'm going to completely wipe out the human race. That was a great meeting, don't you think? I'm going to completely wipe it out, but I'm going to choose one person and their family to carry it on. And guess who he chose? Noah. Noah, it says in Genesis, was the only blameless man living on earth at the time. Can you imagine? He's the only blameless man. And he said to Noah, I've decided I'm going to cover the earth with a flood. We sometimes forget that, like, they'd never seen anything like that. I'm gonna cover the earth with a flood. What's a flood? Just listen, okay? Just listen. I'm going to cover the earth with a flood and destroy everybody that's alive except for you. But I'm going to give you a plan to keep you safe. We read it a minute ago. You're to build an ark. It's a big boat. You live in the middle of the desert, so this should make perfect sense to you, Noah. This is what he's telling him. He tells Noah, build a large boat. You're going to call it an ark. You're going to give you specific instructions. You're going to take some animals on there, which, admittedly, I think that's why we put that on our preschool walls, because, kids love animals. So you're going to do that. You're going to take them in there. You're going to take even some for you. You're going to have some animals to care for, some that I'm going to approve for you to eat and sacrifice and those sort of things. And that's what you're going to do. And it says in Hebrews, when we kind of know, it says by faith he did it. He didn't analyze the situation. Maybe he analyzed it a little bit. We don't have it written down. There was things that occurred that aren't. This isn't a play-by-play. But for all purposes we can tell is Noah did what he was told. And eventually the waters began to come and they began to rise. And the boat, they got in the boat and God shut the door and the boat floated away. And there they were, the only people left on earth that were alive. And after 40 days, I think the rain stopped. And they began to send out the dove to see if they could find dry land. And finally a dove returns with an olive leaf, a branch. It's where we get the phrase, peace. I think it's on separate things you'll see. And they sent it out again, and wow, here it's over. We're the last ones left. Now, here's what it says. God was pleased with Noah. In fact, they came out of the boat, the ark. They made a sacrifice. And even though the people's thoughts and actions are bent towards evil, which they still are, he made a promise that he would never do that again. In fact, it's another thing we put up on, a rainbow. We put a rainbow in the sky. It's a promise that this will never happen again. The earth will never be destroyed again by this way. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and he told them to have many children, and they did, because here we are. And There's 8 billion people on the earth. So Noah got that part dead on right. So you may be wondering, why in the world? Was Noah following God? What sort of faith did he have to have? Could let me ask you this. Could what Noah did, and Noah's not the hero of the story, God's the hero of the story, but let's inspect it. Could what Noah did be done without faith? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Do you think that God is going to, when we are hearing and believing and obeying, do you think he's going to require anything from us that will not require faith? You see, that's the point. That's why those stories are in the Hebrews. It is impossible to walk with God. It is impossible to please God if you don't have faith. Not because God is capricious and isn't able to be pleased, but because in order to walk with him and obey him, you will have to have faith. You will have to have faith. So what was so special about Noah? The thing is, nothing really. He had a day-to-day faith. Nothing was really all that righteous about him. He was blameless in his generation, but he still had sin in his life. In fact, if you read on further, after they all got off the ark, Noah got drunk. I mean, it's pretty wild, guys. It's pretty wild what Noah, he made some bad life choices. Let's just say that. But yet, here is the one. Noah's righteousness was the righteousness that doesn't come from being righteous. It comes from faith. It's called gift righteousness. It was given to him. So the righteousness that comes not from being perfect, praise God, because we wouldn't be able to attain that, but the righteousness that God gives me, he gifts it to me. That's the type of righteousness I get, you get, when I have faith. In other words, God didn't save Noah because he was righteous. Noah became righteous because he received God's salvation, the offer of salvation through righteousness. Noah said yes. So I'll go back again to that verse and really want us to inspect that. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. If I don't have faith, I can't walk with him. If I don't have faith, I won't be able to say yes to him because I'll always be thinking about myself. You know, I think it's fine to think about yourself. I just don't think that could be the first thing you think of. I don't know what number. But when you hear something from God and you believe it in your heart and you make that decision to obey, you are obeying because you're saying, Jesus is the better object of my faith. Not me, not anything else. So what is God calling you to do by faith today? And how much faith is it going to require? And if you're having trouble with that question, then ask this. Could I do this thing without faith? Would it be easy? Could I just do it without faith? And then begin to inspect and pray and think and meditate and wonder and just, wow, God is asking me to do something that will require me to please him to do it. It will require me to walk in faith to do it. I think the possibilities are endless. Hey, that's the side note for today. I'll see you this weekend.